senior at Cranbrook Schools, and I'll be going to Brown University next fall. Today I'm here in front of you to talk about recalibration of neural networks using transfer learning for streamflow forecasting. To give you all a brief introduction, I'd like to first talk about what is streamflow. Basically, streamflow relates to the amount of water that will pass a given point in a specific stream at a given time. And also, I'd like to give a definition of a watershed and river basins. So a watershed is a land area that channels rainfall and snowmelt to creeks, streams, and rivers, and then eventually to outflow points such as reservoirs, bays, and the ocean. And in one river basin, there are many watersheds, and there are over 1 million river basins in the topography of the United States. So in figure 6, it shows the specific river basin we used in our study. It's this really cute river basin in Colorado, and the river network is marked in red, and then the watersheds corresponding to the 6 gauge rivers are colored in blue. Now, why do we need to predict stream flow? Correctly predicting stream flow and river discharge is crucial for the design of resilient civil infrastructures. For example, we must know how much water is typically present during extreme weather conditions, such as flooding, especially flooding, which directly relates to river discharge, to correctly build infrastructure that can contain it, and thus ensure that the surrounding population's lives are not affected. For example, in this top right corner, you can see that this bridge has been affected by extreme flooding in the area, and it's now useless for civilians and people in the nearby communities because the water has, reached up to halfway up this sign, and there's no way you're going to drive in that. And as climate change remains a prevalent issue in our lives, we need to continue to improve the reliability of infrastructures as extreme weather conditions become more and more normal, and we see them more and more often. For example, as you can see in this community, they've been devastated by extreme flooding in the area, so much so that water has reached almost the second floor of houses, and they would have had to evacuate much further up inland, and they would have lost a lot of their belongings, and their houses may have been destroyed. Now, this study uses, first I'll give you an introduction on the RAPID model, which is a physics-based model created by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And it's a popular physics-based simulation model, and it's called the routing application for parallel computation of discharge. And it follows the Muskegon-Punch method using input variables k and x, and those are permitted to vary from one river stretch to the next. So x is a temporal constant relating to the flow of wave's velocity, and k is a temporal constant, and x is a dimensionless variable which is connected to the wave's diffusion. And as you can see, the rapid simulation model takes in information from the river network and uses the runoff data to simulate the amount of discharge that the river has at a certain time, and it uses the parameters k and x. So this diagram shows basically the inputs and the outputs of the rapid model. However, there are several issues with the rapid model due to simplification and linear assumption of the Muskegon model. There's inherent model form uncertainty, and this can result in large errors in the river discharge prediction. As you can see in this figure, the rapid model is shown in the red dotted line, and it seems relatively accurate. However, if you compare the peak size in the true data, it's only around 5.5, while in the rapid model, it predicted it'd be over 8, which is a large amount of error, especially for river discharge. Which brings me to the limitations of rapid. First of all, there's a lack of discharge measurements at some stream gauge stations in communities where it's possible that the discharge stations are not kept up well, or they may not have people checking as much. The data may be inaccurate, or there might be holes in some areas. And of course, as we know, stream discharge is a function of stream flow area and velocity, and it's generally defined as the amount of water moving through a certain location at a certain time. Also, stream flow is difficult to predict with basic models. It's a nonlinear system, so it will have unexpected and random fluctuations, and this can result in unclear outputs. And models must consider various input variables and undergo the relevant calibration and testing to simulate these hydrodynamic events accurately. So that's where we come in when we use machine learning surrogate models in order to substitute these basic models. And lastly, stream flow simulation models tend to exhibit biases in certain regions. Now, to give you a brief overview, although this is not brief, of the existing literature in data-driven machine learning models, which leverage historical data from monitoring states to predict stream flow. So the issue with only purely data-driven models is that they can be limited by the availability of monitoring data, which we talked about also, and how the stream gauge stations may not have like up-to-date data and information. I'm not going to talk about all of these papers because that would take too long, but just to give a few examples, in Rasuli et al., they compared the performance of the Bayesian neural network, support vector regression, and Bayesian process with multiple linear regression and forecasting stream flow in a small watershed in British Columbia, Canada. And they found that the nonlinear models generally outperformed MLR, with BNN usually outperforming the other nonlinear models. Similarly, in Rahimzad et al. 2021, they compared the accuracy of 4 data-driven techniques, and they found that the LSTM network outperforms the other models in forecasting daily stream flow. And then lastly, in Fu et al., which investigated LSTMs in Malaysia, northeast Malaysia, they found that the LSTM model was not only the optimal model for processing steady stream flow or more predictable stream flow during the dry season, but they found that it actually is optimal. It also has a good ability to capture data features from the rapidly fluctuating stream flow data in the rainy season, which is very positive for what we're trying to do, which is more accurately predict stream flow discharge during extreme weather conditions. But overall, all of these 5 recent studies show that the LSTM model is the most effective in predicting stream flow under various circumstances. And also, you guys are all very smart, so you probably know what an LSTM is, but if you don't, I'll tell you about it. Neural networks in general are computation models that mimic the complex functions of the human brain. So they use neurons and interconnected nodes to mimic sort of the neurons in our brain, and they process and learn from data, and thus enable tasks such as pattern recognition and decision making in machine learning. And a type of neural network is the recurrent neural network, and it uses internal memory to use previous outputs as the next input, hence the name recurrent. And a variant of the recurrent neural network, or RNN, is the LSTM, or the long short-term memory network, and it makes it easier to remember past data in memory. So it has better performance in long-term memory retention, more control over forgetting specific details, and solves the vanishing gradient problem, which is when the derivative becomes too small during certain activation functions in the RNN. And there's a wide range of use cases for LSTMs, but some of the things that I thought were interesting is that it can be used in stock price prediction and also Turkey's monthly hydroelectricity production. And this is a diagram of an LSTM cell in figure 2. Now, the first thing we did was create a data-driven LSTM model, and first we normalized the data by dimensionally reducing the M-cube data set, and then it was created with a 3-layer LSTM architecture. And as you know, like in each layer, the output from the LSTM cell traverses through the nodes as dictated by the algorithms that you specify, and then the output of each layer is the same as the hidden state response, which is then forwarded to the subsequent LSTM layer as the input state, similarly to the recurrent nature of an RNN. And then a fully connected layer bridges the LSTM and the output features. And then, of course, the dropout layers will randomly omit input and nodes at a predetermined probability, and these can then be incorporated in each RNN layer. So for us, in our purely data-driven LSTM model, we use gauged observation data and M-cube data to train it. Now come to the transfer learning part. In figure 4, it shows the basic framework of transfer learning. And the steps are, so first selecting a suitable source model from a library of pre-trained models, then designing the source model for our task, and then reusing it and fine-tuning it. As you can see in figure 4, it shows how a first data set was used just to create the LSTM1, which we then use the weights of to have different outputs from a completely different data set. And in our method, we used M-cube data and rapid simulation output data to first train our initial LSTM model, and then we transferred the weights and fine-tuned it using M-cube data and gauged observation data to create the transfer, what is referred to as the transfer LSTM. And now for the case study results. We used the data sources we used, as seen in figure 6 and earlier in this presentation, this lovely river basin in Colorado, and it consists of 479 watersheds, and the river network is also shown here. And we used 6 out of the 479 rivers in dark blue, and we measured, and the data we used is measured discharge data from river gauges in the United States Geological Survey, USGS, and land surface runoff data, or M-cube data. And then we obtained the rapid simulation data by inputting the surface runoff data and then running the simulation. So on the left here, again, the river network and the 6 rivers we used. And then on the right, I'd like to turn your attention to a comparison of these two charts of streamflow discharge observation data and the simulation data. As you can see, if we just pick, for example, the first peak of streamflow discharge observation data, the first peak is at about 200, while the rapid simulation data, the peak is only at around 170. And in river discharge prediction, that's a very large amount of error. And to show the results, we compared the accuracy of 4 different models, the rapid simulation data, which you just saw, the LSTM initial, and the LSTM trained on observation data, and then finally the LSTM trained using transfer learning, which we believe should be the most accurate. And we used the first 5,000 days for training and validation, while the remaining days were used for testing. And here we have two figures of the results. In figure 10, we have prediction and true data for using the initial LSTM and rapid. As you can see, the true data is in the solid blue line, while the rapid simulation data is in black, the black dotted line, and the prediction data using our initial LSTM is in red. And as you can see, while neither of the models are completely accurate, the rapid simulation model actually seems to outperform the initial LSTM in this specific example. And in figure 11, we compare the LSTM using observation data, LSTM using transfer learning, as well as the rapid simulation data. And then, of course, the true data is in blue. And as you can see, the LSTM using transfer learning in red is much more accurate just from looking at the graphs in these than the LSTM using observation data and the rapid simulation data. And actually peaks much better in all 6 river examples, especially as you can see river 4, the LSTM using observation data is completely off, and then the LSTM using the rapid simulation data is also not the best. But we didn't just use the graphs to give to see which one was more accurate. We quantified them using mean squared error comparison as well as the Klein-Gupta error. And as you can see, the LSTM using transfer learning outperformed the other 2 or 3 models significantly. And if we go to table 1 using mean squared error and just pick like a random river, let's say river 4, the LSTM using the initial LSTM has a mean squared error score of 64.524, while the LSTM using only observation data has a score of 34.042, and rapid has a score of 20.071, while the LSTM trained using transfer learning has a score of 2.758, which is much lower than the other three, which is what you want in mean squared error. And in table 2, which uses the Klein-Gupta comparison to quantify the accuracy of these three models, we would want the score to be higher. The higher the score, the more accurate. And if we pick another random river, let's say river 6, you can see that while they're all pretty similar, 0.593, 0.293, and 0.156, the LSTM using transfer learning continues to outperform the other two. And if we go through all of these scores, you can see that the LSTM using transfer learning is much more accurate. In conclusion, this study proposes a novel method for streamflow forecasting, which surpasses the individual limitations of physics-based simulations and data-driven machine learning by applying transfer learning to recalibrate a neural network, which is initially trained on simulation data, and then refining it with actual gauged monitoring data. And according to the mean squared error and Klein-Gupta efficiency scores, which we used as comparison factors, the transfer LSTM is more accurate in its predictions of streamflow runoff than other methods. And this is great because it can be leveraged to help cities improve their infrastructure planning in the face of climate change. And we do note that the proposed method is influenced by the quality and quantity of available monitoring data, and this can potentially limit the efficacy of the model in regions with scarce or unreliable data collection networks. And while the integration of physics-based models with machine learning introduced a robust framework for prediction, we do assume that the initial physics-based simulation is accurate enough and relevant enough for subsequent machine learning enhancements. So, for example, predictions generated by the rapid simulation model might not achieve optimal accuracy, which could result in a subpar performance from the LSTM model, which is derived from it. And while integration of observation data has mitigated this issue, there remains a lot of potential for further enhancement. And so we think future work in this area could explore more advanced machine learning techniques that can efficiently extrapolate insights from limited or noisy data, which is what we always want from these types of models, to enhance this performance in data-scarce regions, as well as extend the hybrid modeling framework to incorporate ensemble methods that leverage multiple machine learning models or simulations, and this could create a pathway for more robust forecasting systems. And of course, multidisciplinary research that integrates hydrological science, climate science, and advanced computational methods could uncover new insights and methodologies for streamflow forecasting in the face of climate change. And I'd like to say thank you for the funding and for this work, and also Nicholas Olson and Eliza Yates for providing the data set for the Bayesian used in this case study. And thank you all for listening to my presentation.